Imagine a villain walks into the scene, delivers a sharp line, smirks like he knows something we don't, and suddenly, without even realizing it, you're rooting for him. You know he's manipulative, selfish, maybe even ruthless, but still you'd rather watch him than the good guy. To be fair, this isn't an accident in any way. It's the power of a charismatic villain, and only few characters embody it better than Loki, the god of mischief from Marvel's universe. So how did Loki, an adopted prince turned deceiver, manage to steal the audience's loyalty over and over again? The secret lies in his charm, twisted logic, and the way he challenges authority. Loki uses charm like a weapon. When he talks, he disarms. His insults are clever, and his banter makes you laugh even when you know he's plotting betrayal. Heroes often rely on sincerity and straightforwardness, but Loki thrives on charisma. This makes him appealing. Unlike villains who crush their enemies with brute force, Loki seduces with words. He convinces, manipulates, and entertains all at once. And because he does it so smoothly, we forgive him far more often than we should. Then he has his wits. A villain becomes truly likable when they feel smarter than everyone else in the room, and Loki fits that bill perfectly. Even when his plans collapse, the intelligence behind them is undeniable. He plays the long game while others are stuck in the moment. Heroes charge forward with noble intentions, but Loki changes the game with illusions, riddles, and unexpected moves. Audiences can't resist cleverness. When he slices through the hero's moral speeches with a cutting one-liner, we find ourselves secretly applauding. What really hooks us though is Loki's twisted logic, the kind that almost makes sense. His motives are framed in ways that tap into universal feelings. He resents being the overlooked child in Odin's shadow. He wants recognition more than destruction, and his speeches about humanity's eagerness to kneel or worship authority reflects frustrations many people have about real-world systems. You don't have to agree with him to understand why he thinks that way. That's where villains like Loki turn into anti-heroes. Of course, much of Loki's appeal is inseparable from performance. Tom Hiddleston's portrayal gives him screen presence that commands attention. The way he slouches into thrones, smirks through lies, and radiates confidence even in defeat turns arrogance into art. He doesn't dominate scenes with size or power, he dominates with energy. Even when Thor is supposed to be the central figure, Loki pulls the eye because charismatic villains don't just play their role, they own the frame. There's also his anti-establishment appeal. Audiences love rebels, especially when the hero represents order and tradition. Loki thrives by poking holes in authority. He exposes the cracks in Odin's golden image of Asgard, mocks humanity's fragile pride, and constantly undermines Thor's nobility. In doing so, he becomes a voice of rebellion. He isn't just fighting heroes, he's pushing back against conformity and hierarchy. Deep down, people are drawn to characters who challenge systems they themselves resent. What keeps him from tipping into full villain territory, though, is that he lives in the morally gray sweet spot. Loki is cruel but vulnerable, a betrayer but occasionally a protector, manipulative but deeply insecure. Those contradictions make him relatable. It's an indication that no one is completely good or completely evil. And perhaps the simplest answer to his likability is this: Loki is fun. His chaos brings unpredictability to otherwise straightforward hero arcs. Even his failures are enjoyable because he fails with style. Every time he gets knocked down, he gets up with another smirk, another scheme. Watching him is entertainment in itself, which is why Marvel kept bringing him back long after his supposed final defeat. When you put it all together, Loki triggers what you might call charismatic villain syndrome. We know he's dangerous, selfish, and deceptive, yet we celebrate his victories, laugh at his insults, and forgive his betrayals. He entertains us more than the hero, challenges us to think, and blinds us to his cruelty. But Loki's not the only villain with this superpower. Even while he showed us how villains can win us over with mischief and humor, Light Yagami from Death Note takes us into far darker territory. He isn't cracking jokes or pulling pranks. He's methodical and deadly serious. Yet, just like with Loki, audiences find themselves strangely drawn to him. In fact, Light represents a different branch of charismatic villain syndrome, the kind where conviction and twisted morality trap us into rooting for the very person who terrifies us. Why do viewers find themselves supporting someone who casually writes names in a notebook that kills people? The answer lies in Light's intelligence, his sense of justice, and his uncanny ability to make his villainy look like virtue. Light's charisma doesn't come from charm in the traditional sense, it comes from confidence. From the moment he discovers the Death Note, he carries himself with the certainty of someone who believes they are destined to change the world. That level of conviction is captivating. People are naturally drawn to characters who know exactly what they want and move forward without hesitation. Where other villains stumble or doubt, Light never blinks. His self-assurance makes us want to follow his logic, even when it gets into dangerous territory. Meanwhile, Light isn't physically imposing, but he doesn't need to be because his mind is the weapon. The mental chess match between him and L is the core of the series, and audiences are glued to every move because Light's cleverness makes villainy exhilarating. When he escapes capture, manipulates situations to his advantage, or outsmarts his pursuers, it's hard not to cheer, even as we remember that he's committing mass murder. What makes him truly compelling, though, is his twisted sense of justice. Unlike Loki's rebellion against authority, Light doesn't frame himself as a trickster. He positions himself as a savior. In his mind, the killings are justified. He's cleansing the world of criminals, building a utopia where he becomes the god of a new era. It's disturbing, but the terrifying part is how easy it is to understand the logic. Many people want a safer world. Most people wish criminals would be punished quickly. Light takes those desires to an extreme, presenting his massacre as the logical solution to a broken system. This is where the audience gets caught in the trap. Light's reasoning isn't completely wrong, it's just horrifying in application. And that's exactly why we stay hooked. When a villain forces us to think, to wrestle with ideas we'd rather avoid, they become unforgettable. His screen presence comes from control, and every scene with Light feels like it's orbiting around him because he orchestrates events like a conductor leading a symphony. Whether he's pretending to be innocent with his family, outsmarting the police, or silently writing in the Death Note, he radiates an aura of superiority. That self-control, the calmness under pressure, is what makes him so captivating to watch. Unlike chaotic villains, Light embodies something that is just as fascinating. Light also appeals to that anti-establishment instinct. He looks at the existing justice system and declares it broken. He doesn't trust the police, the courts, or the government. Instead, he takes matters into his own hands. For viewers who feel disillusioned with institutions, Light's defiance is understandable, even if his methods are terrifying. He taps into the fantasy of tearing down corruption and inefficiency, even though his solution is absolute domination. The rebellion lies in raw, uncompromising power. Another reason people find him likable, despite knowing better, is his duality. To the outside world, he's a model student, a devoted son, someone who looks trustworthy and normal. Beneath that, he is Kira, the executioner with a god complex. This dual life creates something that makes him endlessly fascinating. That duplicity draws us in because it's both horrifying and thrilling. So we can hate what he does while still respecting how he does it. And that contradiction is the essence of why audiences can't look away. Ultimately, Light Yagami is likable not because he's nice, but because he embodies qualities we can't help but admire, even when those qualities are twisted into something monstrous. He's the kind of villain who wins by convincing us that maybe, just maybe, he has a point. In the end, it's not just the Death Note that's dangerous, it's the way Light makes us complicit in his vision. But then there's a different breed altogether, the villain who doesn't need illusions or notebooks of death, but instead wins us over with pure intellect and authority. This takes us to Lex Luthor. Unlike Loki's mischievous flair or Light Yagami's god complex, Lex thrives by being the smartest man in the room, a human with no superpowers who dares to challenge a god, and strangely enough, a lot of us admire him for it. So what exactly makes Lex Luthor so compelling that people often find themselves agreeing with him, even when he's plotting the downfall of Earth's most beloved hero? Lex's appeal begins with his aura of control. Where other villains explode with rage or chaos, Luthor rarely loses composure. He speaks with authority, moves with purpose, and always makes you believe he's 3 steps ahead. Just like Light Yagami, there's something fascinating about that confidence. That alone can make audiences lean in, even before he's laid out a single argument. But of course, his real weapon is his mind. Luthor's wit doesn't come in the form of quick jokes or one-liners. It's in the way he dismantles Superman's image with logic. He constantly reframes the narrative that Superman isn't a savior, he's a threat. Why should humanity trust a godlike alien with unchecked power? Why should people kneel to someone who can't be held accountable? Even fans of Superman have to stop and think. This is where Luthor's twisted logic takes center stage. At first glance, he's selfish, power-hungry, and manipulative. He fears dependency on Superman. He fears what happens if this so-called protector ever decides Earth isn't worth saving. Luthor becomes compelling because he embodies the voice of skepticism. He says the things we don't want to admit. Absolute power, even when benevolent, is still dangerous. And when his arguments land, it forces the audience into an uncomfortable place, realizing that the villain might actually have a point. That's the brilliance of Lex Luthor's likability. He doesn't win people over by pretending to be noble. He wins by exposing cracks in the system. While Superman represents hope, Lex represents realism. And that realism is clear with anyone who has ever questioned authority, distrusted institutions, or doubted the idea of a flawless hero. Moreover, Lex Luthor isn't just a man in a suit. He's a rebel in a world dominated by gods. He stands as proof that humans don't need capes or superpowers to shape the world. In his mind, humanity should lead itself, and while his methods are ruthless, the philosophy itself is empowering. Viewers, consciously or not, get pulled into that idea, that standing against impossible odds. Of course, his charisma isn't just in his speeches. Luthor's presence on screen always feels commanding because of how he brings sophistication with menace. That balance between refinement and rage keeps him unpredictable. You never quite know if you're talking to the genius CEO or the madman who sees himself as humanity's last line of defense. Another reason we find ourselves intrigued by him is that duality. Luthor isn't just a villain with plans of domination. He's also a philanthropist, a businessman, a public figure. He wears the mask of respectability so well that half the world sees him as a visionary. Watching him navigate between those personas is fascinating. On one hand, he's the corporate genius funding hospitals and space programs. On the other, he's the mastermind plotting Superman's downfall. That contradiction keeps him far more engaging than a one-dimensional villain. And then there's the simple fact that he makes Superman more interesting. Superman, on his own, can feel invincible, untouchable, even too perfect. But put him in the same arena as Luthor and suddenly the fight is balanced. Luthor doesn't just test Superman physically, he tests him morally and philosophically. He forces the hero to defend his very existence, and in doing so, he elevates the story. Audiences root for Luthor in part because he gives Superman something no other villain can, a worthy challenge. So if Lex Luthor embodies the human mind challenging gods, then Homelander changes that equation entirely because he is the god who terrifies us by acting all too human. Unlike Light Yagami's cold calculation or Loki's playful mischief, Homelander's appeal doesn't come from elegance or logic alone. He's the villain who makes you hold your breath because you know he could annihilate the world in seconds. Yet you can't look away when he smiles. Homelander's charm works differently from most villains. On the surface, he's the golden boy, the all-American hero with a winning smile, a flag-draped cape, and the charisma of a celebrity. He knows how to perform the role, to project confidence, and to appear like the ultimate savior. And because his charm is staged for cameras and crowds, it hits harder. We recognize the media polish, the way corporations dress up danger in a friendly mask. Where Homelander becomes truly compelling is in his warped logic. He frames himself not just as a hero, but as the only one fit to lead humanity. His reasoning leans on superiority. Why should gods pretend to be equals among men? Why shouldn't the most powerful dictate what's best for the weak? The terrifying part is that it almost sounds consistent. Audiences know it's dangerous, yet we understand where it comes from. His backstory of corporate grooming, isolation, and abuse makes his arguments feel less like random evil and more like the worldview of someone shaped by trauma and unchecked power. It's not just villainy, but it's broken logic applied with absolute conviction. Screen presence is another major piece of Homelander's magnetism. Every time he's in frame, he dominates it. You never know what he will do, as he owns silence as much as speeches. Then there's his anti-establishment edge. Homelander isn't rebelling against authority in the name of freedom. He is authority, yet constantly resents the corporations and governments trying to control him. That alone gives him a strange kind of relatability. Meanwhile, audiences recognize the frustration of being used by systems, even if he expresses it in the most horrifying ways possible. He represents both the face of power and the rage against power. That paradox keeps him interesting. He's the villain and the rebel, the ruler and the prisoner. What makes him even more captivating is the contradiction between image and reality. To the public, Homelander is flawless as a savior, protector, symbol of hope. But behind closed doors, he's insecure, petty, desperate for validation, and prone to horrifying outbursts. That duality mirrors real-world celebrity culture, where polished exteriors hide broken people. It's compelling to watch because it feels honest. Villains who are untouchable become boring. However, Homelander also thrives in that morally gray space that defines charismatic villains. He's undeniably brutal, manipulative, and egotistical, yet his need for approval, his scars from childhood, and his longing for genuine connection make him strangely human. At the core, Homelander is fun to watch because he keeps stories alive with tension. Every scene with him is unpredictable. He makes victories feel fragile, conversations feel dangerous, and silence feel loaded with menace. Heroes may be the heart of the story, but Homelander is the reason we keep watching. And that's the essence of his likability. He entertains us, he challenges us, and he terrifies us all at once. So when we ask what makes a villain likable, the answer isn't simple. Sometimes it's wit and mischief, like Loki. Sometimes it's conviction twisted into godhood, like Light. Sometimes it's intellect and authority, like Lex. And sometimes it's raw power wrapped in insecurity, like Homelander. Each of them embodies a different side of what I'd call charismatic villain syndrome. That dangerous mix of presence, logic, rebellion, and contradiction that pulls us in even when we know better. Deep down, we don't just want heroes who save the day. We want villains who make us question why we're watching in the first place. And maybe that's the final trick. The most likable villains aren't just entertaining characters on screen. They reflect our doubts, our frustrations, and our hidden desires back at us. That's why we root for them, laugh with them, and sometimes even agree with them. Let me know what you think in the comments.